quickly, NSSP's goals, we've gone through this. Those of you who have been on other sessions, know that our goal is really to support the government of Nepal's vision for school safety. And it's really only safe if everybody can actually participate in it and can participate equitably. So if there's anything in the way that the school is set up or operates that deepens inequality, discrimination, and marginalization, it can't truly be considered safe. With this project, we tried to improve aspects of physical accessibility, such as retrofitting of buildings to include things like access ramps. When COVID-19 hit, we obviously did a bit of a pivot in our project, and we expanded project activities to include wash work and help mitigate the spread of COVID-19. In order to do that, we constructed hand washing stations and toilets that are child, gender, and disability friendly. This was a pretty big change from what we originally started off to do, but we think that it was a really positive move for the project and for the schools that we worked in. This work is really complex, as all of you probably know better than I do, and we encountered many, many challenges while we did this. With retrofitting, the existing school layout and infrastructure was often a huge challenge. For instance, in many places, it was only possible to add a ramp on just over 50% of the buildings we worked on, mostly because the existing site layouts didn't have the appropriate conditions for building ramps, including space and all kinds of other issues. And we're also, we're aware that we address some of the issues around accessibility, but it goes far beyond just ramps for physical access. There's so many other types of inclusion and accessibility issues to consider. And that's why I am really excited about having this discussion about inclusive design, because when something is designed with these accessibility factors in mind, it means that they can become a consideration right from the beginning. Rather than something that's an afterthought or has to be remedied afterwards. It shows a true change in mindset and priorities. So I'm looking forward to a great discussion today, and I thank our panelists for agreeing to participate. And I will hand it back to you, Vita, to take it forward.
Thanks, Lula. Great. Thank you for that. So today, as Lula mentioned, we'll be talking about inclusive design for learning facilities. So just a brief reminder of the agenda for today. So we will first have a presentation. I'll hand over to some of my colleagues who are inclusive design specialists from Arup, who were involved in NSSP, as Lila mentioned, in some of the accessible design for the COVID pivot work. So a sort of a brief overview of inclusive design holistically, touching on some of the points around Nepal. And then we've got two excellent panelists who will be providing a bit of discussion about inclusive design in Nepal and their experiences of implementing inclusive design. I'd really encourage anybody who has any questions to post them in the chat box. We will we'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the session, and please do introduce yourself as well. Let us know where you're dialing in from and from where. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mei Yi and Zach for the presentation on sort of an overview of inclusive design. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Rita. My name's Zach. From the Access and Inclusive Environments team at Arup. I'm joined by May today as well. So thank you for your attendance. We hope you enjoy listening to our presentation. Just a bit of background about us before I start. So the Access and Inclusive Environments team at Arup, we consist of registered members of the National Register of Access Consultants and internationally recognised access and inclusive design professionals. We work from 3 offices in the UK, and we work globally, assisting a variety of clients from many different sectors to achieve inclusive environments. Our projects today have seen us advise on citywide master plans through to detailed interior fittings and finishes, and all provide the benefits of truly inclusive design. So our presentation today, this is just an overview. We're going to first talk about inclusive design. Sorry, what is it? Can you just go back a slide, please, Vita? Thanks. What is it? Why do it? Who is it for? And then we will talk about inclusive design in practice using some global examples. Okay, so next slide. Next slide, please. So what is inclusive design? We may think that inclusive design is about designing for disability. And although this is part of inclusive design, there are many ways in which the things we design can make it difficult or even impossible for different people to use or access them. So inclusive design aims to meet the needs of a broad range of people, providing comfortable, safe, and enjoyable spaces for everyone. Next slide, please, Vita. And inclusive design is more than just making spaces accessible. As well as creating safe and usable spaces, inclusive design aims to provide an equal experience of space for everyone. Next slide, please. We can define inclusive design by these key principles: providing an equal experience for everyone, providing understandable and intuitive design, offering choice and flexibility in design, and importantly, inclusive design is human-centered. That is, people and their different needs determine how we design. Next slide, please, Vita. The School Sector Development Plan by the Ministry of Education in Nepal places an importance on inclusive design in improving access, participation, and learning outcomes within the education system, and in reducing the imbalance between different children and their access to education. Next slide, please. When we tackle the barriers and inequalities which exclude people by adopting an inclusive design approach, we also better understand people's needs and how we can more effectively design for them. When we understand people and design for them, we can then create places that everyone can use and enjoy. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned at the start, inclusive design is not only about designing for disability. People are complex, and everyone has different needs and experiences related to both their physical, sensory, and mental characteristics, and the influence of various social and cultural factors. For instance, people have different levels of mobility, vision, hearing, memory, attention, and dexterity. And likewise, people experience the world differently depending on their age, their gender, or their socio-economic status. Inclusive design aims to accommodate this variety and therefore provide a comfortable, safe, and enjoyable space for a broad range of people. People may have multiple needs, and some of their needs may overlap. Similarly, whilst needs may be permanent, some needs may be temporary in a person's life. For instance, the mobility needs of someone with a broken leg will be much higher than usual whilst they recover from their injury. Next slide, please. The Child Friendly Schools Manual by UNICEF emphasises the importance of safe, inclusive and welcoming schools that accommodate the needs of children with different types of disabilities. At the centre of this is the importance of harmonious connection between the design of schools and school grounds and the wider neighbourhood environment, with the emphasis on facilitating children's access, use and participation in education and community life. Next slide, please. To make a difference, inclusive design practice must apply as much to the renovation of existing schools as to the design and building of new schools. In both instances, while there is no singular blueprint for school design, inclusive design, that is, placing people and their different needs at the very centre of design, has the potential to create more equitable, safe and enjoyable spaces for everyone in a variety of contexts. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about inclusive design in practice and showcase some example projects we have worked on at Arup. So can I hand over to May, please?
Well, thank you very much for that, Zach.
Yeah.
So with that overview in mind, as Zach said, we're going to run through some case studies to illustrate how this has been applied at the different scales for staff and for students in a school environment. So we're going to be looking at a human scale, at the points where people are actually interacting with specific points within a space, at building scale, looking at the impact that the overall space has on the occupants, and at neighbourhood scale, thinking about how this all connects back with the community and other infrastructure that might be in place. So in our slides, we're going to share some high-level international examples. And as Vita mentioned earlier on, we'll then have some more detailed local examples from our panelists later in the session. Next slide, please. So as Zach mentioned before, inclusive design is about designing for people and understanding that the built environment, if designed correctly, can have a positive impact on how people feel and perform in that space, and also have very positive impacts on health and well-being as well. Next slide, please. So starting with the human scale, there are some immediate barriers that we would be looking for in a project. So whether there is stepped access that will prevent someone from accessing the space or the facilities, whether the circulation is wide enough to allow people to use this comfortably, whether the facilities, which includes the teaching facilities, any toilet spaces, whether they accommodate for different needs, and this includes consideration of menstrual health management as well. Next slide, please. So as we can see from this slide, the schools project had a wider objective of improving access to sanitation facilities to improve the general provision. So we've got a quote there, or statistic there, to say that 20% of government schools currently lack improved water and sanitation facilities, and an additional 19% lacked separate gendered facilities and consideration for menstrual hygiene. If we go to the next slide, please. So the project aimed to obviously improve that situation and improve facilities across Western Nepal to include accessible family toilets and hand wash stations. If we go to the next slide, so the design features that we integrated into these toilets included the introduction of ramps to provide an inclusive and a step-free approach that everyone is able to use, with sufficient widths to accommodate wheelchair users and other people who might require additional space as well. The basin included 2 heights to accommodate for different heights of children and heights of adults, people who are standing, people who are seated and using wheelchairs, as well as providing knee recesses to allow wheelchair users to get much closer to the tap and to the sink. If we go to the next slide, please. So on this slide, we can see the outcome of this. The toilet and the sink allow space to both sides to accommodate people who might require assistance. So for example, if people have carers, to assist with transfer and use of the toilet and of the sink. The toilet and the sink will be specified to be age and height appropriate, with grab rails to allow people to support themselves whilst they're actually using those facilities. There's also a clear circulation space in the cubicle, allowing people to access and to turn whilst they're in that space in a comfortable manner. There's also inclusion of sanitary and nappy bins within the cubicles as well. And this, coupled with the integrated sink within the cubicle, will allow people to accommodate menstrual hygiene management much more easily, as well as providing facilities that will suit other users as well. So that might include people who, people with stomas, people who use nappies, and others as well. If we go to the next slide. So now looking at the building scale, we can start to think about the context of the space and how this can be designed to enhance the overall function. So this might include thinking about the different types of users within the building. So for example, the teachers and the students and how they interact, and if there's anything in the building that can help to facilitate this further. If we go to the next slide, please. So providing equal access across the building, providing choice and flexibility within the building to adapt to different needs, and including the consideration of environmental controls as well will be essential for creating an inclusive space. The flexibility aspect will allow a building to adapt without needing to add cost or time to the operation of the building and to suit new requirements in new school years from students or for teachers, as well as accommodating needs from community users as well. We go to the next slide. Thank you. So following the Hurricane El Nino, over 15,000 schools were being rebuilt in Peru to increase resilience to future disasters. And so as part of this project that we were involved with, the opportunity was taken to look at how schools could be rebuilt to be more inclusive as well, to address the statistic that we've got on screen there, that for disabled children in developing countries, only 48% actually complete primary school education. If we go to the next slide, please. So in this project in Peru, we worked with the team to create a typology that could be applied across different schools and regions within the country. And this consisted of single-story buildings so that opportunities and access to facilities could be afforded for all teachers and students. Step-free access and evacuation was afforded to allow independence in how people actually use that space as well, and safety in all of those procedures. Where there were regions where flood mitigation was required, ramps were considered, and also thinking about how we can use the landscape to provide different entry points whilst accommodating those climate considerations as well. We made sure that the spaces were accessible with wide circulation spaces and connection between staff and students. And this was a key principle for the interior of the schools. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that this was developed to allow flexibility in how that space is used. So having clear connections between internal and external spaces, spaces that were designed to suit the age group of the students, and flexible spaces to allow the building to adapt to suit the needs of different intakes for the school. This was all paramount to the school typology that was developed. If you go to the next slide, please. So finally, at the neighbourhood scale, we're looking at the community and how we can meet those wider needs. And in the context, sorry, if we go to the next slide. Oh, thank you. So in the context of a school project, thinking about that neighbourhood scale, this may include consideration about how people will be travelling to school, the existing transport and existing infrastructure that's in place, the impact of any immediate construction works that might be taking place during the project as well, and how that might change how people use the access routes around the community, and also thinking about that local context in terms of climate and culture as well. If we go to the next slide, please. So this is a project that we did in Sierra Leone earlier on this year, and towards the back end of last year as well. So for this training centre in Sierra Leone, we were involved in designing the hostel accommodation for students. And this involved consideration of not only the hostel itself and thinking about how people, what accessible accommodation and social facilities are actually being provided, but also the wider site to consider how people would travel to and from, and the interface that this has with local transport, with the pavements, and with the wider community as well. If we go to the next slide, please. So for the hostel itself, we again provided a single story solution that would afford equal access to all parts of the hostel, which included the sleeping accommodation as well as the communal spaces for socialising and leisure activities as well. Routes between those would be weather protected to allow people a safe and comfortable journey throughout the building. The travel to and from the hostel and the training centre required people to access an uneven terrain. There was very little formalised infrastructure, and so conversations as part of this project were really important to discuss the operational and the management aspects of the project once it's built, which included thinking about the opportunities to work with government to improve infrastructure and connections as part of the project, the opportunities to work with the local community to connect different services as well that people might be using, and also thinking about measures that the training centre itself could implement. So we talked about things like a pick-up and a drop-off service between the two spaces, using a sort of local taxi service. If we go to the next slide, I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. So just to summarise, inclusive design is about meeting different needs, creating spaces that everyone can use and enjoy. It's also recognising that people have different and sometimes complex needs, and this needs to be considered as part of the process at the human, the building and the neighbourhood scales to create a truly inclusive space. Thank you very much for listening, and I will now hand back to Vita.
Thanks, May. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think it was a great overview of sort of inclusive design for education as a whole. If anybody has any questions for me and Zach, Helen has made a point in the chat here about the impact of tin roofs on hearing impaired children, and sort of use of metal shutters in closed rooms that affect children with poor vision because they make the room so dark. The question is, what measures has NSSP incorporated to address some of these aspects? I think in terms of the wash facilities that we were doing, we weren't focusing so much on the classroom in the sort of reconstruction part, but I think making sure that there was adequate lighting, they had concrete roofs, and things like that to address some of those things. Although it is really important, I think you make a great point around thinking about retrofitting classrooms so that they have a lower impact in some of these areas. Helen, I don't know if you wanted to say anything sort of.
Yes, it's just that we see a lot of work going in after the earthquake with retrofitting, but when it was finished, many of these schools were still as noisy and as difficult to teach in during the monsoon. And I feel like, you know, we need, just as you've come up with good wire meshing and arrangements for schools that are built with small stones, how do we use local technologies to reduce the echoing and the noise in these classrooms? And in the retrofitting, some of them, they've put at the top of the wall, you know, metal into the triangle at the top of the classroom between classrooms, making them even more noisy. And it's just, I think it's something we do need to take into account going forward. As we're starting to use those classrooms, we can see that there's still issues in how disability friendly they are for children who've got hearing or visual impairments. Some of them are better lit, but then the noise is intense and echoing problems.
I think that's a really great point. Thank you, Helen. I think that's a really good segue over to our panelists. If you guys have more questions, please pop them in the chat. But I will hand over to our panelists in a second. So we've sort of given a few guiding questions, and feel free to ask your own questions or provide inputs as well. But we will start off with Raj Padal, who's the Deputy Project Director for the National Reconstruction Authority of the Central Level Project Implementation Unit in Education from the government and from Paul. If you could pop your camera on, perfect. Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you share the slides? My slide. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about some accessibility issues and some solution and my experiences and also some of the challenges that we have for the construction of the school building in Nepal. Next, please. We know that the education, the Constitution of Nepal has a mandatory provision of every citizen shall have an equal right to get a free education. And also Nepal has committed in different forums for the equitable and also ensure the inclusive and equitable quality education to all. And when you talk about the accessibility, accessibility is not only making the access to enroll the children in schools, it talks more about the creating a conducive environment for children for learning. So that's why we need to improve the school physical facilities in the school in a holistic way, which play an important role to make the conducive environment for teaching learning in schools. It helps to increase the enrollment and decrease the dropout and improve the quality education as well. Next slide, please. So accessibility the schools should be accessible to all children. We know that in Nepal, the school mostly located in centrally located in the community and connected with the roads as well. And to solve those issues, the CRPIU education after 2015 developed the guidelines developing the types design for a school building in Nepal, which give emphasis on providing all required facilities in the schools through planning and design, incorporating the visible friendly and also silent friendly elements as well. So we give more towards developing of the holistic approach of school physical facility development. To achieve that goal, we develop the different guidelines. For example, the developing the type design for school building in Nepal, as well as we have the structural design criteria for the type design of school building, even for the toilets and the water supply as well. We developed the design basis report so that every designer could have the the systematic or logical order to develop the design if they want to develop by themselves as well. We implement the national building code, and also we use the color code developed by the government of Nepal. Next slide, please. In the case of design, for the case of classrooms, we use the 1 square meter space for every children. That's why the classes we have the 32 to 35 students. We design in that way. The minimum distance from the whiteboard to the first bench is 2 meters, and the maximum distance from whiteboard to the last bench is 7 meters, so that it easily visible and also clearly understandable to what the teachers wanted to talk with the children. And we have the standard for the laboratory and ICT and practical room as well. We design it for the 16 and or 32 students, depending on the number of the students. It can be varies depending on the type of the work or practical classes that we are going to conduct. And the general assumption is that half of the classes will be involved at a time. For the case of toilet, we have the separate toilet for boys and girls, and we have the separate toilet for the boys and girls. For the boys and girls as well, we standardize it. For example, for the case of 100 students, schools urinals 2 and water closet 1, and also the girls we have the water closet and wash basin as well. Similarly, we have the different number of urinals or wash basin, even for the changing rooms for the girls. In the case of boys toilet, yes, we have the incinerator in the case of toilet as well. You can see in the table we have the different number of urinals and the water closet and wash basin based on the number of the students. Next slide, please. For the user-friendly design, the ramp is mandatory for easy access for differently able people. And for the disabled-friendly toilets, we have in every schools, we have at least one disabled-friendly toilets. Provision of grab bar and feed bar for hand support, and one spacing installed in the different level for based on the children, the age of children. Basically, for the disabled-friendly, the 750 mm from the floor level, and the door width around 1100 mm for easily the going and exit of the wheelchair users. And the provision of the changing room and incinerator in the girls' toilet. You can see, even in the case of our DRSP or ADB supported project, we have such a provision of changing room in the girls' toilet so that they can easily use that room when they change the sanitary pad, and also dispose from that room to the incinerator easily, and then the incinerator, the time to time, it operate or want all those disposed materials as well. So for the case of drinking water, we have the different hand wash facilities and also the drinking water facilities for the different height of the different height for different age groups. For example, in case of tap, around 750 mm for the young kids and 850 mm for the older kids as well. We have the different type of furniture design as well. For the ECT, we generally use the floor seating and also the circular table with a 1200 mm dryer. And for the case of classes 1 and also class 3 and 5, and classes more than 6, so we have the different height of the furnitures. We have the design, so we implement those design in the field level as well. Next slide, please. For the safety and security, the maximum escape route of 30 meters is maintained in all buildings. We have the 2 exit doors in every classroom so that if during emergency, it can be evacuated safely. The maximum visual access to corridor and grounds by the school authorities as much as possible. We have such kind of design. However, it totally depends on the availability of the land and also the site condition. And for the case of corridor, in every corridor, we have the minimum clear width to 2 meters. For the staircase, width is 2 meters and trade is 300 mm and the rise is 150 mm, so that the children can easily go from one floor to another floor as well. So we have such provision for the ECG classrooms and laboratories and in the ground floor, so that easily can use those facilities. We have the drinking water with filtration systems, and we have the solar backup for operating of the laboratory or the different classes whenever necessary. And recently we made one the cover pathway system in the case of our recent design, so that when the children wants to go from building to the toilets, during the rainy season, and also they can use that cover pathway to go from building to building and building to toilets as well. However, this is a new kind of concept that we have just try to implement, and yes, you can see in the field level as well. And at the end, we have this disaster risk management plan as well, which not in all schools, but we really wanted to replicate to all of the schools. It applied at the moment to the ADB supported project, and also in which we train to the schools, the community, particularly the students, teachers, and the SMC members, to empower them about the importance of the creative facilities and how to maintain those facilities, how to use that creative facility as well. And also we provide the training to the menstruation and the hygiene and the environmental issue as well. We prepare the DRM plan. So next slide, please. So we prepare those DRM plan, and also we trained to some of the groups, for example, selected people to take the lead, as a leader for different, the sector areas in the school level as well. Lastly, we we talk with the local authority for the maintenance. We prepare the maintenance manual, and also we hand it over to the committee. So in the conclusions, what I understood, the holistic approach of planning, design, and construction is very important. As we know, during the pandemic situations, all the schools are closed. However, most of the schools, they, in the Kathmandu Valley and urban center, they, they operate the schools through this virtual system. So at the moment, what we are feeling, we prepare different kind of design for the ICT room as well. That helped a lot during these seasons. And also every institutions who really wanted to support in the school reconstruction for the improving the school physical facility in Nepal. So please use the nominee standard. We prepared a lot after this earthquake as well, and so that we can go with some standard practices in the uniformity and harmonize. The design can be implemented in everywhere. So. And for that, we need collaboration, coordination, cooperation among the stakeholders. So it's very important because government alone cannot do all. We must focus for the construction of the classroom, or what we can say hardware component. For that, we have the standards. And however, for the software component to reach every schools, we need the support from all the stakeholders in this regard. So next slide, please. I have some pictures I can show you. These are the recently constructed school building. Even you can see the different kind of the design there. Implemented, even we implemented heavy kind of the retaining walls and also the site development works. You can see the very beautiful schools because of the pandemic. Even our development partner, our the supporters are working, and even the support hands are not possible to visit the sites. However, we have such kind of the recently constructed school building. Next slide, please. You can see that we implemented this water tank and the filtration system in the work in the schools. You can see the drinking water facilities for the different age students. We have the separate toilet for girls and boys and hand washing systems. We have the site development works and the ramp as well. So these are the recently constructed toilet and water supply systems in the schools. Next slide, please. So these are, you can see in the number one, the digital friendly toilets, with this we can see in number one, digital friendly toilets. And in number two, you can see the girls toilet with urinals, and number three, you can see the ramp, which can use by the wheelchair user to go in the classroom and also for the toilets. So next slide, please. These are the few examples. We also construct the multi-purpose hub and hostels as well for the modern schools. And you can see some example with the site development works, and also the carpentry. You can see the site development works with the bioengineering as well. Whatever we can, but government, at the moment we have some support from the development partners, and we really wanted to replicate those kind of the whole school approach of designing, and construction, and other part of the particularly the outside of the 14 districts and outside of these 31 districts. That means where we do not have such kind of program. Thank you so much. That's all I think from my side. Thank you so much. These are the ECT room. In the last slide, I think this is the ECT room with the floor seating and also classrooms with the furnitures, and also the office room, administration room, and also the solar panel installation systems. So thank you. Yes. Next slide, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I thought it was really interesting to see some of those examples there. Brilliant to see a lot of the step-free access and egress that we mentioned earlier on in practice, and the accessible toilets, and also the measures that you mentioned earlier on around sort of sanitation and access to sanitation. We have a question from Jemima in the chat, so I'll open this up to everybody that hear about. Wonderful to hear if there are more options for menstrual hygiene management, and the feedback from schools was very strong about appreciating the incinerator feature in the toilets, but since sanitary pad disposable seems to be a major challenge for schools, and existing toilets and septic tanks are often clogged because of improper disposal, are there any other ways, perhaps which may not have the same environmental impact as burning, that menstrual hygiene can be supported through design?
May I respond?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so yeah, actually the what we develop, what we design, what we implement in the school level, the usefulness definitely is there. However, you know, we a lot facing the use of those creative facility. For that, we need the intensive, you know, the kind of awareness building program. For example, if you give some new thing to any person, for example, even for us as well, we need to give some. We need to give some people need to give some training or some kind of practice as well. So, however, for that case, we have been talking much on those issues from the beginning. However, it's more difficult in the rural areas of Nepal. So, what we have been thinking, the providing of the sanitary pad, the pad is the responsibility of the local government, and also local governments should need to take a lead for that. In the schools, even sometimes the children by themselves can approach those kind of the sanitary pad systems, and then we need to train, and also we need to develop some leader. For example, the female teachers, or we can lead those kind of things, and we need to train to them, and we need to train to the school children as well. We develop the incinerator, but most of the locations we can see them not functional. However, we need to, it's a continuous process. We believe that once we develop some facilities, we need to encourage them to use those creative facilities. We need to empower the local governments, because they have a right, from the constitution as well. All the schools belongs to the local government. So we need to develop some implementation guidelines, or some the system as well. We have such kind of observation. So after this reconstruction, we really we already started the discussion with the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, and also our support the agencies as well. For example, UNICEF, for example, World Education even, yes, and also the many our strong supporter from the beginning to strengthen those the kind of activity in the local level. So this is my observation, I think, regarding how to use those creative facility and the scientific area.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask May to ask a question in a second. I'd just like to add a point as well on some of the things you mentioned actually earlier in your presentation about having areas for washing and drying in the latrines and the sanitation areas, and that's another way to kind of promote use of maybe the reusable ones, which have less of a disposable issue, and as long as those are private and not sort of out for people to see, it's also a great way to kind of minimize disposal the impact and as well. So it was great to see you mention those in your presentation, and I just wanted to highlight those. May, did you want to either add anything more on this point and then ask your question?
Yeah, no, so I think just what you said at the end there, Vita, you know, having the toilet cubicles which have the sink integrated just offers that flexibility and that additional facility for people to be able to use, as you say, some of the reusable products, you know, and just to kind of build in that confidence and that privacy for people. So I think that's probably one of the key things that I'd say as well. In terms of the question, then I just had I noticed that on some of the slides, and again, thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. But I noticed in some of the slides that there were some recently built school images that had sort of multi-story buildings, and I just wondered if you could share your thoughts on how easy it has been from those projects on actually balancing inclusive design and what sort of features you incorporated, because I think for some of the discussions that we've had and the projects that we shared earlier on, I think one of the key things about sort of multi-story buildings has been the cost of putting in lifts and the practicalities of having very long ramps. So just very interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, we all know, you know, the many concerns that we have from the government sector. The earthquake gave a very good opportunity to rethink on or to, you know, the recap on what we did in the past. So we learned a lot from this earthquake, and so that. Luckily, I was one of the members for this post-disaster assessment, and also the formulation of those the planning guidelines and the structural design criteria as well, and also developing the different modular design. That's only the feasible option for us. Even though we discussed a lot at that time as well, you know, the Helen we discussed, and also, you know, she rightly pointed out the roofing systems and also our door and windows. Still, we have such kind of problem. However, you know, for the case of accessibility for the multi-story building, still we have the problem in the different, you know, the floor. It's not possible to construct the ramp, but we really wanted to give one or two example in some of the schools. That's why we have recently we started to construct one school, which is heavily, you know, the heavy cost that we can see recently just started. It's not possible to, you know, provide ramp in that floors, and sometimes it's also difficult. We feel difficult, you know, because of the cost as well. The toilets in every floor. However, we try to, you know, develop, and we can say, you know, based on the cost optimization, if some disabilities or, for example, wheelchair users, the most of the facilities that we need to, you know, adjust in the ground floor so that he or she can use those kind of system, you know, without any hesitations. Even that is the questions, you know, the hand wash system for inadequate of the water supply in the many of these schools. However, local authority, and also we try to, you know, the support to the schools for, you know, the connection of we try to, you know, we build we construct the water tank, heavy water tank, and we connected the water from the community to the schools, and we try to collect those, you know, during the night hour and use in the daytime. Rainwater harvesting is one of the other very important, you know, the system. However, you know, we always feel, you know, even now as well, we create some kind of facilities and we develop such kind of thing. But how about the sustainability? How about the maintenance of the creative facility and system? So these are the many issues that we have still. Even for the retrofitting, we have, you know, as a pioneer, you know, before earthquake we start with retrofitting, and all of these schools are safe during the earthquake of the retrofitted one. So we are excited, you know, now we are implementing, as I was at the time also engineer for working with department for retrofitting, and then we successfully implemented. Now also we already started those, but the how to incorporate those kind of the child friendly or disabled friendly the system in the retrofitting design. These we have the challenge. However, we try to incorporate as much as possible. So this is my the observation. I think. Thank you so much. The important thing here is that for your information, recently we incorporate the changing room in the girls' toilet. This is a very one drastic change. In the education, the infrastructure development in the school facilities. So changing room and also the wash facilities within the wash basin and also hanger. So it's a very yes, we try to change those system in the, I think what we can say, based on your suggestions, the international community, and also it's a total depend on the cost as well. So these are my observations, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we'll do one quick question from Narayan, and then we'll move on to Animesh, our next panelist. Narayan.
Okay, thank you, Vita, for this opportunity. And
you're very quiet.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe just hold your mic a bit closer.
Thank you, Vita. Are you hearing?
Still very low. I think I can't hear.
Hello. Hello. Still not?
It's too low, I think. Yeah.
You sound like very far away.
Yeah.
Thank you for both the presentation.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
yes, Narayan sir. Yes, please go on.
And especially Yuvraj sir, for this comprehensive work you have done through the reconstruction. As you also mentioned on the presentation, this is possible because of the support from the development partner, looking the infrastructure and the investment we are putting on the school, on the reconstruction area, the design and the comprehensiveness. Based on your experience and the opinion, how economically is it feasible to carry on this comprehensiveness to the other parts of country through the government investment? So that is just your opinion. Can we, after the December, can we take this forward to the other parts of the Nepal?
Thank you. It's a very important question. I think we need to, yes, based on my working experience, even in the school sector, around the more than 15 years in the school sector, what I learned is that we always try to talk or try to develop some document of the holistic approach of school reconstruction, holistic, the comprehensive school safety, but even the support or working hand, even we are not follow what we develop in the paper. What I feel, rather going in, rather counting the number of the schools where we are supporting, let us go the incomprehensive way. Because in Nepal, I think the most of the schools, yes, we can see the poor in the buildings and the central facilities, but most of the areas we have such kind of even some system, but not in the comprehensive way. What I feel, if you want to touch in one school, and let us go with the comprehensive way, so that not go in the coming years. In the coming years, you need to go with the existing one. For example, for the maintenance, because the requirement could be some changes. So what I mean is that let us go in the plan way. Some assessment need to be there, some assessment of the enrollment for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and develop the system or design and then go with those construction accordingly. For example, if you need, based on our the current guidelines, if you need the different facilities, even the sick room as well, we have such kind of provision. Even this changing room, it's a really feasible, What we have been implementing now, what I feel, what we invest before, if we, if we were implemented in line with our current, the plan and program from the beginning, I think we'll not have such kind of losses in the school building. Yeah, we have invested a lot of money, and we, distributed many schools, and through the development partner support, through the NGOs, and the many stakeholders we have. Let us work together and then go in one school or two schools, how much we can, and then complete and then go to the next. So this is my the observations. We can do. It's really feasible. We have the many, the designs. We have the many, the cost-effective design as well, feasible design as well. We have the many trained manpower at the moment. So this is my observation, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for that vision of an accessible Nepal in the future. I would like to hand over now to Animesh, who is a disability inclusive social protection specialist from Humanity and Inclusion. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've got your slides up next, so take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Vita. Yeah, good afternoon and namaste to all. This is Animesh Acharya, working as a disability inclusive social protection specialist in Handicap International Nepal, also known as Humanity and Inclusion. Earlier, during my assignment post 2015 earthquake, in the response and reconstruction phase, I have also worked as an inclusion and accessibility focal point, providing technical support to reconstruction individual and public building. So today, thanks for providing me an opportunity to express my desire. The earlier speaker have covered most of this area, but however, I think I can share some information with you about accessibility. So first of all, what is accessibility? So next, please. So a design, in simple word, a design that is friendly to use without support from others. And also it provides safety for user, providing enabling environment, making them independent user. So that we can say about accessibility. Why? To promote mobility and to promote participation and to promote equal access and self-dependency for all users, not only for the person or children with disability, but for all stages, all population in every stage of their life journey. And also under international human rights, UN CRPD, Nepal have endorsed this agreement. And according to Nepal law, Nepal Disability Right Act 2017, public building, including schools, should be accessible for people with disability and based on universal design principles. So how we make a building or infrastructure accessible? By implementing universal design standard. And if it is an existing one, adapting the facilities by retrofitting or redesigning. Next, please. So some why we need accessible infrastructure. So about some past statistics, the 2015 earthquake destroyed or damaged 92% of public schools. So that was a huge loss, and leaving many children with and without disability out of school across the country. It was according to Asian Development Bank report in 2017. Next. And also in a 2011 report, Human Rights Watch estimate that at least 207,000 children are out of school in Nepal. So next, please. So what is enabling environment or removal of barriers? about infrastructure, to making building, including gate, corridor, pathways, stair, elevators, or ramp. We need to focus on these elements. Next, please. Yeah, and same thing about the classroom, entrance, furniture, fittings, board for the user, for the children, and office room, canteen, lab, library, auditorium, similar as classroom, and wash facility, similar as classroom, and playground, safe and without barriers for the users. So next, please. So for making any infrastructure accessible, we follow the 4 principles of accessibility. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So we follow, it will be easy to follow these 4 principles, and it is easy to remind. Next, the first principle is to reaching to the infrastructure, entrance. The next is entering into the facility, infrastructure. The third principle is circulating inside this facility. And the fourth is use. Next, please. So you may wonder what will be the cost for making any infrastructure accessible. So if it is a new infrastructure, making it accessibility will increase your cost by 1 or 2% additional, 1 or 2% additional cost, and redesigning may take 10 to 15% additional cost, or maybe maybe even more according to geographic and other specialty of the building and the surroundings. Next, please. Yeah. So while making any infrastructure accessible, we need to consider height and width of the facility, color of the coloring of the borders for especially for the visually impaired children, railing, ramps, and elevators, and also providing easy facilities like door handle and railings that should be considered to provide accessibility. Next, please. So these are some pictures that may guide you. These are all according to the universal standard of the accessible infrastructure. Next slide, please. So these are about the classroom, the wash facilities, the corridor, path, and so other facilities. Thank you. Next slide, please. So enabling to provide enabling environment, only providing physical structure is not enough. So we should also consider about communication, mainly language, use of local or mother language of the children, sign language, especially for the children with hearing impairment. Medium should also be an important aspect. Braille will be needed for the visual impaired, and audio video medium we need to adapt according to the children, different children with disabilities, and also equipment and devices, maybe magnifying glasses, hearing aids, color code, education material, or the assistive devices for the children with physical disabilities. And not only about the communication, also we need to consider about social support, counseling for the children and parents, and maybe counsel also with teachers, peer support. The children with disability definitely need support from the peers, children and their teachers, and providing teachers training. The teachers should be well aware about the disability aspect, the type of disability, different needs of the children with disability, their specific needs, and their physical and psychosocial needs to be addressed. And also, sorry, the last point is not visible from my side. Rita, can you help me?
It's the last point on I can see here is the DRR planning and the
Yeah, definitely. The DRR planning, since the government also made it mandatory for all the school children have to be enrolled in DRR planning, and also my earlier speaker Yuvraj sir have addressed that. And not only for the children, but you may witness that public school buildings are also serve as an emergency shelter in any disaster situation in most of the countries. So making the school building accessible and providing DRR planning, that will support, definitely support to promote the accessibility. Next slide, please. Yeah. So concluding that, why we need an accessible infrastructure to promote accessibility for all the users, children, and teachers, and maybe the parents and all the community stakeholders, and to promote inclusion with equal participation. So that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. And I think there was a really key point that you mentioned about the use of school buildings for other uses, particularly in a post-disaster context, and you know, that importance of everybody being able to use the building safely and evacuate from the building safely. So thank you very much for those points. We've got some questions in the chat. I will just put them out to the audience. There's one here direct for Animesh from May. Is there anything different that you think will need to be incorporated post-pandemic for inclusion in the Nepal school context?
Yeah, definitely. It's a new learning for all. Earlier, our DRR planning used to talk about the different disasters, mainly the geographic disaster or man-made crisis like war or something. But now we also need to consider about the pandemic or the health-related issue. So this will be a new topic to discuss and provide information to the children and the school stakeholders. Definitely, we need to incorporate the pandemic or health management in our school education and the overall system.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think all of these, particularly the wash and the sanitation aspects, are really important to kind of promote that and making sure those are accessible as well.
You know, adding to that, you know, the universal shelter and the universal infrastructure provide room for the easy crossing and participation, but also it provide a lot of ventilation, light, and that are also needed for this pandemic management. So yeah, adapting the universal standard will help in many ways.
I think that's a brilliant point. Yeah, I mean, health and well-being are intrinsically linked, and all of these things contribute. We've got a question from Padam here around compliance in construction. So in some schools it was observed that the ramp was built, but it was too steep. And how can we make more strong monitoring and compliance? I don't know who wants to pick that up, but I think it's a really good point.
Yeah, my earlier speaker have also mentioned about it. Yeah, the ramp should follow the universal standard. It should not be more than 1:12 in the ratio. The best ratio will be 1:20 for the slope, and providing grab rail on the both sides, and junction in between if it is too long. So that all are included in the building accessible building code provided by Nepal government. So these are all we can follow it. But yeah, not providing ramp only at the entrance is not providing accessibility. We need to consider about the children to be use all the facilities within school, classroom or laboratories or the libraries or the playground. And in some limited area like higher mountain area where the land is limited, maybe the school we need to construct two-story or three-story building. But as Yuvraj sir mentioned, yeah, essential services are to be provided in the ground floor so that we can support the accessibility, promote accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Animesh. And I think we've probably got time for one more here from Brenda around how have children with disabilities been accessing education and learning remotely through the pandemic? Could you share some examples of what mediums have been used? I don't know if that's something you have been involved with.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation for the children and the parents. At present, I'm not involved in the education program, but I can only imagine that the children, even the children without disability, are having issues to continue their school education. The situation will be is more severe for the children with disability, and especially in context of our country, where the community school children are mostly from the poor family background. So maybe you sir can add something about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yuvraj, did you have something? Did you want to add anything on sort of remote learning in the pandemic?
Yeah. So it's a new thing actually. Not only to Nepal but also to the world. So everywhere, we have been using the virtual platform. So basically, yes, the mentioned we discussed the private schools. They have been using this different kind of virtual platform for this. Yes, discussing or teaching to the children. However, even for the community school and also what we can say public schools, we have the different the virtual system that the government announced. And also I'm not an educationist, I'm just an engineer. So what I heard that some televisions or some the radio, and also even some very good public community school, they use the ICT virtual platform for teaching and learning and sharing and communicating. So these are, yes, what we learn, as we discussed before as well, we need to, the set of such kind of system in our, the schools. For example, for our case, we have designed for the ICT, the room, and we have already constructed, and many schools they use that platform, that rooms, because nowadays the computers from the different the support agencies, they provide the computer in the schools. Yes, they are trying to connect with the children. At least they already started. So this is also the learning. Actually, that's also the one of the opportunity as well. Even now, that we have discussing with this platform. So these are the example. So and regarding what the Helen just mentioned about some example how we can fix the issue of the classroom for when the children in the tin roof, and also that we have such kind of issue. We try to solve, because everywhere if you ask to the community, they need the RCC structures, they need a concrete building, and we try to support to them. However, maintaining the quality, to every school is a really difficult because of the materials. So how about to fix those the issues we implement? We have a provision of this false ceiling system, and also we try to improve the door and window as well with the glasses, and also nowadays we implement that as well. And yes, I think regarding the ramp, we implement in a minimum level 1:12. However, all we have such kind of system. Even we have the water supply system, we have the toilets, we have the classrooms, but the really important thing is that how to use those created facility, how to maintain, how to motivate to the people, children, and then make the awareness, capacity building to the community, capacity building to the local authority, capacity building to the teachers. If you have the good, the head teachers, then these are the now became the demonstrated one of the pioneer school, even in the Kathmandu, even outside the Kathmandu as well. So these all depend on the management committee, how they operate, how the schools as a whole work as a team. So I think at this moment nowadays the not much problem within these 14 districts and even in the 13 districts within the affected the affected districts, we have other capacity building or just what I mentioned before. But let us focus outside of those the affected districts. Let us make a plan. Let us replicate the hours, norms, and standard, and make a holistic approach of school reconstruction and also the other DRM activity plan outside of those 31 districts, outside of the what we can say the non-affected districts, but still much vulnerable than the current one, because the western part is what we can say the more vulnerable in terms of accessibility, in terms of education, in terms of the disasters. So this is my point, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was, it's a real learning curve for all of us, and I think it will be a theme that continues throughout. We've got one last question from Anil, which perhaps Mayi, if you could just answer us very briefly, and then I'll hand back to Leela to close us out. Anil's just asking for any sort of special requirements in terms of infrastructure. I think we've touched on quite a few of them today, but I don't know if you wanted to add anything quickly.
Sorry. So I think as you said, Vita, and as the other panelists have kind of mentioned in their presentations as well, there's some sort of obvious ones in relation to step-free access, ramps, lifts where possible, but there's some other things, I suppose, which which can be integrated or incorporated within the schools themselves in terms of the education facility. So thinking about sort of the education spaces, thinking about things like quiet rooms for different, so that there are opportunities for children with different educational needs to be able to step away from perhaps busier areas to do some focus learning, and having that opportunity or having that choice, I think, in terms of the types of learning environments, to again acknowledge the fact that people process information in different ways, people learn in different ways as well, and so just being able to accommodate that. That's the one that kind of sprang to mind.
Brilliant. No, I think that's a great point, and I think a great point to end on, to say, really it's about thinking about how everybody learns and how they learn in loads of different ways. So I'm just going to round off saying a huge thank you to everybody, all of our presenters and panelists, but also to everybody who's contributed so many great questions. It's been a really lively debate and discussion. So that's been brilliant, and yeah, we've really enjoyed it. So I'm going to hand back over to Leela to close us out for today.
So I just want to echo Vita's sentiments. It was a great discussion today and a really, really interesting one. So thank you, all of you, for participating in the chat discussion. On behalf of NSSP, which includes NSET, Save the Children, ARUP, and Crown Agents, I really want to thank our presenters and panelists today. Zach and Mei Yi and Animesh, we appreciate your contribution. We learned a lot and it was really interesting. A special thanks to you, Brajji, for his presentation today and his really great participation all week long. It's been wonderful to have you as part of our Learning Week. I urge all of you to participate in tomorrow's session. It's at the same time, and please do share the invite within your networks. We'd like to see as many people as possible on our last day of the Learning Week. And of course, a huge thank you to FCDO for supporting the Nepal Safer Schools project. That's all I have, so have a lovely day, everybody.
Thank you, Lila. Thank you, everyone.
Everybody,
Thank
have a
you.
good
Thank you so much. Thank you so
day,
much.
evening, whatever time zone you're in.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks,
so much.
guys.